Hello, hope all is well. So today we're going to be looking at a quick concept here, which is a one-button expression pedal, which is something that I use in my main preset, and it's pretty easy to set up. And the thing I want to share here is that you can use this concept on a whole host of effects and applications, and maybe you can use them then in some creative ways that might be useful to you. So today we're going to be using control switches. You might not have heard that term before, and there are different ways of setting up. And so with the FM3 today, I'm going to use perhaps the easiest way of setting it up on the unit and the easiest way of demonstrating what they are and what they actually do. So for the preset, we're just going to put something quickly together. So an in and an out. Hook those up. We'll go for an amp and a cab, and that's it for now. So what you use for an amp and a cab, I guess, is irrelevant in the sense that we're going to be showing how to use a control switch. But I'll set up a sound so that we have some idea of how things sound, obviously, and then what the controllers will be doing. So for the amp today, we're going to be using the Cameron CCV2B. We'll leave that at stock settings, and for the cab, we'll go to Dynacab. We'll be using the 1960 TV cab, so greenback cab, dynamic on one side, condenser on the other, and I'll space things out how I usually do. So off cap on both, tiny bit of distance, and that's pretty much it. So this is what the bass tone is. So now we're going to set up the control switches for the preset, and this is something that you'll have to do on maybe existing presets if you want to incorporate this, if you don't want to mess out with your layouts that you're using. So for this, we go down to FC Edit, and you'll see here you've got your various layouts that are over here. So as you can see, I've set up my layouts 1 and 2 to be something custom. You can of course select a new layout and then change the foot switches here. But what we're going to do is that we'll stick to the same layout that, say, you always use. And for the purposes of this preset and what we're going to be showing, we're going to be using something called per preset override. It's super easy. So in this case, we're going to change this first foot switch. We'll hit per preset override, and we'll set it to be PP number 1. You'll see this will show up. And then on the second switch, we'll set it to be per preset number 2. So basically now, when this preset is open and selected, it will override your existing layout for those switches, and instead it will use the per preset foot switch that is set up in the following menu. So for that, we go to the FC per preset page here, and this is where we then set what these foot switches will be. So for example, on PP number 1, we're going to set it to control switch. We'll leave it momentary and control switch number 1. And for PP number 2, same thing, we'll set it to control switch. This time we'll set it to latching and control switch number 2. The important thing here is on the control switch set to momentary that the hold function is unassigned. So that should be unassigned, there should be nothing there. Now the difference between momentary and latching is that for momentary, when you're holding the switch down, the effect will be active, and as soon as you let go, the effect will be deactivated. And in latching mode, if you hit once, the effect will be active or turned on, and then if you hit it again, it will be turned off. So those are the small differences between one or the other. I like to use momentary with these sort of things because then I get this really nice sort of quick transition, and then as soon as I let go, I'm back to the bass default sound. So by doing this, we're not messing around with existing layouts that we have, and then we can tailor things to a specific preset. As said before, you can obviously go to a different layout and then set it up however you like. So to start off with, I'll add a pitch block say to emulate the Digitech, it's the Ricochet, I think, which is a one-button whammy, as it were. So you can use it in either Momentary or Latching to go up to a certain pitch or to dive bomb and things like that. And so that's what we'll set up here as an example. So on the pitch block, we'll go to classic whammy, and we'll see here the different settings. Mix is on 100%, and we'll leave that as is, and we'll leave it as up 1 octave. The only thing I'll change here as a tip to get better tracking, depending on how you or where you place the pitch block, is you set the detector source to input 1, and we'll put the pitch tracking to fast, and we'll put that to 10. It uses a bit more CPU, I believe, but in doing this, you'll have better tracking of the pitch you're playing and the resolution, I guess, of how the pitch is changing. And now if I play, obviously control is 100%, so it will be 1 octave up. You can further tweak things here as well with the high cut. If you think that that higher octave, for example, is a bit jarring, you can pull this right down so it might sound a bit more friendly. Dial to taste, of course. So now we'll look at, say, using control switch to affect this control knob. So if I play now, for example, I'll set it at 0 to give you some idea of what this is doing. So this is what we'll be controlling. And the way here is that we'll right click and this window will come up, and under source 1 we'll hit control switch 1, which as you saw before, that's our momentary switch. So without doing anything, without changing anything here, it'll look a bit awkward because I have to move a bit to hit the switch, but this is what it's doing. So as long as I'm holding down the switch, it will pitch up the whammy to 100% here. So the thing here is that the parameter range controls how much or how high you want to go on that parameter. So in this case, for the control, we want it to go up to 1 octave up, which is when the control is at 100%. And next to this, and this is what I find is a really interesting control, is you can set how long it takes to reach 100% in this case, and how long it takes to go back down to 0. So in this example, if I set both of these to 0, it will go up to 100% like straight away, and it'll go back down to 0%. And now the thing that is really cool that you can do is by using the attack and release, you can set, oh, I want it to slowly go up to 100%. So by increasing the attack, say to around 1000 ms, this is what we get. As you see, because the release is still set to 0, it will immediately drop to 0. And the same concept applies for the release. So if we set that to around 1000, do the same thing. And one thing cool to note here is the damping here. So you have two options, exponential and linear. So with exponential, I'll use this curve as a sort of example. If I move, say the mid, at least in my understanding, the exponential curve is sort of like the logarithmic on your volume pot. So it'll be more of this kind of curve, at least that's what I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course. We'll set this back to 100%, and linear means that it will just follow that line up. And that can be useful when you want to be more specific in its values and the response that you want. And something that you can also do is customize this curve there. So if you set things to linear and you move this around a bit, you can sort of get a different feel to it. And by changing these values, you'll get a different curve. And maybe that's something that you want for certain effects. For this, I'll leave it at the default values because we want that basic kind of linear pitch up, and it'll return back down. So one of the applications and the way I like to use it is, for example, on the wah block. So we'll add a wah block on here. And this is with the stock settings. And we'll use the same principle of like the one button expression on this control knob. So we'll right click on the control knob, set the source to control switch 1, and then we'll set things up so that when I'm holding down the switch, it will slowly go up to say the max value or the top end of the wah on the control parameter. So basically I'm using the one switch to sort of simulate going down on the foot, if that makes sense. So we'll use the same principle. We'll set the attack to maybe around 1000, so that it'll take around that time to get to that top point that we're going to set as well. And we'll set the release to 0. So as soon as we release, it will immediately go back down to 0. Something cool is also the auto engage. So the wah will engage as long as we're holding down the pedal and it's going up. And as soon as we release, it will disengage or bypass the wah block. And I like, I guess, the fast position so that it will immediately turn off as soon as it goes down to the bottom. I like setting the update rate here to fast. I'm not sure how much of a difference it makes, but I find with like something like this, it seems to react a bit better. And the thing here is I'll put the max range because I find the high end of a wah pedal can get, I won't say harsh, but it gets very bitey. So I like to pull this down a bit to say around 8. So I'll play around a bit. So now you'll see how it's moving here, and then we'll see how it sounds. And now to add to that, we're going to look at the control switch 2 that we set up that's set in latching mode. I'll use the pitch block as an example again, so we'll turn this back on, and then we'll right click control and we'll switch this from control switch 1 to control switch 2. So the same principle applies, but now when I hit the switch once, it will slowly climb in this case, and then when I hit it again, it will slowly descend. So when I turn it on, it will remain on and it will remain at the top. And as soon as I turn it off, it will go back down to 0 based on the setting that I've set here. So hopefully that shows the difference between the momentary and the latching modes. I pretty much exclusively use the momentary mode because I like how I can affect different parameters as long as I'm holding the switch down. And then as soon as I release, it goes back to the default values. Now, the thing about this is that you can basically have this modify on anything that you want that is modifiable, which is, I guess, a long phrase to take in. But as you can see here, anything that has this sort of yellow circle underneath, you can use a control switch on. And depending on what you're after or how useful some of these controls are, you can set it to do all sorts of things. And now here's another example with the delay block. I've gotten rid of those other blocks in front, and so we'll just be looking at the delay block set after the amp. There we go. And we'll use monotape in this instance. I've put the mix up a bit higher. I can even put it higher than that, to be honest. We'll put it at 30%. And then with these settings, this is what we're getting. So you really hear the delay here. And now, using the same principle as before, we'll use our control switch so that when we're holding it down, so the momentary control switch, it will up the feedback, and I think we'll up the mix as well. And then when we release, it will slowly back both of those down. A bit like, I guess, the infinite feedback on, say, Strymon pedals. And I'll show another way of doing it afterwards, using this repeat, stack, hold. But I find that when you're using a control switch on both of these values, you get a better control or feel of how you want the feedback and the sound to be. So right-click on feedback. A quick note here, when we set it to control switch 1, you'll see that when we go back here, it's set the feedback to minus 100%, which is not what we want. So in this menu, you'll see in the parameter range, that's where you have to set things to be where you want. So on the minimum, we'll go back to around, let's say 20%. Quick tip, if you hold control and move the mouse, you get more precise control. So we can set it to exactly 20% if we want. And we'll leave the max at 100%. Same thing here, so I want it so that when I'm holding down that switch, it will take a certain amount of time before it gets to 100%. And then when we release, it will take a certain amount of time to go back down as well. So with this in mind, we're just controlling the feedback. This is what we get. So the thing here is that we kind of want those repeats to get louder as well. And one way of doing it is to use the same control switch on the mix. So we'll set one here, the same control switch. And I'd suggest going up to maybe around 50% from the same value of around 30%. And we can use the same principle in terms of the attack and release. So it was around 500. The other way of doing this is by using the repeat, stack, hold feature here. The only thing here is that, for example, when you're using stack, is that it takes into consideration these settings. So your feedback's not increasing, it will stay at that amount. And so when we're controlling this, when you release, it will be at 20%. That value won't move. So for this example, we're gonna set control switch 1 to put on stack as long as we're holding down the pedal. So the same principle, hit right click, source 1, control switch 1, which is our momentary, and we'll set this to stack. Set both of these to 0. So now when I play and hit the control switch, it's going to activate that as long as I'm holding it down. So you could hear when I released, the feedback stayed at 20%, so it actually cuts off relatively quickly. And the other thing we can do to make this more interesting is then upping the feedback at the same time. Same principle as before. So by doing this, we have, I think, a nicer kind of curve or a different kind of sound of when those feedbacks or those oscillations, if you will, go back down to your stock settings. So there we go, a fairly long overview of at least how I use control switches, and hopefully some ideas as well how you can use that concept or that principle to control different things in the Fractal unit. I like to save space on the board, so having a proper expression pedal, as great as that is, I don't have the space, so I've been using this to sort of circumnavigate the problem and have quick and easy versions of having the same kind of effect, but with much less real estate. So thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. Take care.